morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. So I want to take a little time and share with you some perspectives on why we're all here today, why we're here on Saturday morning while probably most of our friends are still sleeping and just slowly waking up, and also a little bit about the opportunity that we have. And I'm going to do this through my own perspectives as someone involved in this field from many different angles. It's from research to entrepreneurship to venture. I just want to start with the good news. It's always good to put it in perspective of where we stand right now. And I'd say, in many ways, we're doing pretty well, right? Our lives on this planet have improved in so many amazing ways. On average, we're healthier, we are less poor, we're more literate, we're less violent, and we're longer living than we ever have been before. The data supports that. I would say despite those positive changes, we humans are suffering, and it's getting worse. And this is not, I'm not referring to the well-known crisis that we've inflicted upon our planet's climate. Although I'd say this one is just as threatening to our future. What I'm talking about here is what I think of as a crisis of our minds, or a cognition crisis. So I want to be clear, a cognition crisis is not a lack of information or skills. We've done a fine job of accumulating those and passing them on along across the millennia. Rather, this strikes at the core of what makes us human, how our brains interact in a dynamic interplay with our environment. So how we perceive the world around us, how we integrate that information through thinking and feeling, and then how we act upon it. And it is from this perception-action cycle that all higher human cognition has emerged. And it is here that our crisis exists. I think this presents us with what I have come to believe is the most important global challenge of our time, and that is enhancing human cognition. Before we dive into this, I just want to put it in context by saying that we humans have long been obsessed with this concept of biological self-optimization. And in this world, in the physical fitness world, when it comes to our physical faculties, so strength, endurance, power, speed, flexibility, balance, coordination, we have seen specialized equipment, programs, and practitioners all devoted to optimizing these abilities. But when it comes to our cognition, optimizing the abilities of attention, perception, memory, reasoning, decision-making, creativity, imagination, our emotional regulation, empathy, compassion, and wisdom, we are tragically lacking. And we're paying a great and growing price for this. So we know that 500 million people around this planet are suffering debilitating effects of anxiety and depression and attention and memory deficits. And these numbers are rising, notably for seniors with dementia and for our youth with attention and emotional regulation challenges. This problem extends beyond what we might think of as the clinical domain and really affects everyone to some degree. Data suggests that creativity and empathic concern are falling while narcissism is rising. Even the well-known Flynn effect, which documents an improvement or an increase in IQ around the world over the last century, has stagnated and even is declining in some developed countries. I think that this actually presents us with what I would position as a grand challenge of enhancing human cognition, that I would prioritize right up there with other big, important global challenges. If we cannot focus our attention in a sustained manner and make decisions that are wise, creative, and future-oriented, that prioritize others over ourselves, we will never effectively address other complex time-delayed crises like climate change, no matter how much information we acquire. So this is the challenge. Fortunately, we have these two giant, multi-century global institutions that should be well poised to address such a challenge. Our education system, for when we are developing cognition in the first place, and then our medicine, mental health care system, for when we have deficits across the neurological and psychiatric domain. Unfortunately, I would say that neither of these institutions have really stepped up to this challenge appropriately. And before we talk about how we can have solutions, particularly around the domain that we're all here, I want to break down what I view as 5 pervasive and deeply rooted problems that exist across both of these systems. The first is that we have very poor assessments. So a lot of the advances that we have in, let's say, cognitive neuroscience, where we use functional brain imaging to understand the human brain as it interacts with different environments, has not advanced from the research world into either the education world or the medical world. Same thing, particularly in the education world, is that we don't really assess cognitive abilities in young people unless we think they have some type of learning disability or developmental challenge. Other than that, it's a black box. You can ask a teacher how the students in their class are on reading and math, and they can tell you instantly. But how's their working memory? How's their sustained attention, their emotional regulation? Unknown. So understanding the brain of each individual is a big problem to begin with. But that doesn't prevent us from trying to improve cognition in some way. The problem is that we have very poorly targeted treatments because we have relied in the medical world almost exclusively on these small molecules, pharmaceuticals, drugs. There's nothing conceptually wrong about using a small molecule to improve our cognition. Remember, I defined cognition very broadly just a little while ago. The challenge is that for 60 years we've been trying to, and we do not yet have a molecular treatment that targets neural networks in the brain, which is the underlying computational unit of how our brain works. Therefore, we have to increase our doses to very high levels to get the effects we want, and we get pretty much just as many side effects as we get effects. A lot of what neurologists and psychiatrists do is treat those very side effects. On the education side, we rely on this global system of didactic education, which is largely focused on transferring information content, but not building the underlying information processing systems that depends upon. Again, another big problem with targeting these improvements. Another thing is that they're both incredibly non-personalized. So in the medical domain, we base, like physicians like myself, base our prescriptive advice on large population studies that completely ignore all the individual differences of the people in those studies. Same thing in the classroom, right? There's a big problem about curriculum not leaving children behind or dividing up classes with different abilities, creating inequity. Again, not really personalizing the learning process to each individual as we know would be ideal. Some practitioners, not the best, but many do on both of these domains, is create silos around it so that something as complex as human depression can be treated with a single pill, or that all of learning and cognitive development in young people would happen in the classroom. But what I think is the biggest problem is that they're both open loop systems, meaning that there's a long, sloppy, non-quantitative cycle between how we intervene and then how we update that intervention depending on how it works. So with a pill, on this treatment, you would go home, you would take your medicine, and months may pass where you subjectively monitor your effects and side effects, go back to your doctor, and then we go up or down 5 milligrams, right? That is the art of medicine. And I'd say it's really not good enough, right? We see the same problem on the education side. The taking of a test does not update your knowledge or your understanding or how your brain is working. It just places you in some, maybe for you, an abstract way about where you're going to be next year, not in that moment. And so this is the problem we face. Now, these are not subtle problems, right? These are fundamental, intrinsic hurdles in the entire global system of improving our cognition. And I put this up here for several reasons. One, I want to create a parallel between what we think of as education and what we think of as medicine, and say that when we think about mental health, these boundaries are not very clear, right? You could be a child in a class that has, what child doesn't have some attentional challenge? And then at some point, you move from being a student to a patient, you get medicated, maybe you go back to being a student, right? These lines are blurring. The other thing that I believe is happening is that we've sort of polarized them. So healthcare is now really about sick care, and education is about healthy developing minds. Essentially, falling in the middle is everything related to preventative health and wellness. Everything else has been marginalized as alternative, not mainstream, and I think that's a big disservice. I do want to take a moment and give appropriate respect and acknowledgement of all the advances that are occurring in what we think of more in the lifestyle activity domain of ways of improving our brains and our mental health. So I'm not going to go through all these, there's a lot here. It's really impressive how they have moved more frequently into common practice. But I would say, without going through this in detail, a lot of these real-world practices also suffer a lot of the challenges that I presented for the education and medical system, especially that many of them require the presence of a human expert, a teacher, a trainer, a leader, a guru, a shaman. There's someone that's required, and that presents a lot of accessibility issues and also a lot of variance in the quality that these type of treatments can be delivered. And so, I would say what we're really after is something that has at least part of these ingredients, hopefully all of them. Better assessments, targeted, personalized, multimodal, and closed-loop systems. So this is sort of the transition point to thinking about technology. And I think there is a tremendous opportunity, and that's what I believe you're all here today. I'm going to break that down a little bit. I just feel like I have to pause for a moment and note that technology has also challenged our brains in a fundamental way. I actually wrote a book on this topic called The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World, which is really an evolutionary perspective on the strengths of our brains and also our limitations in cognitive control and how they collide. Basically create a conflict between what we want to do and what we're capable of doing. This conflict was not created by technology, it's always existed. But I'd say the just unprecedented access to information that technology offers has challenged this and challenged us in some ways. I'm not going to talk at all about this today, but as you think about technology as a solution in this domain, it's really important to understand where it's challenging us as well so that we can sort of do better going forward. This is a quote from a friend of mine, Jon Favreau, a Hollywood producer and director. He says, "I want to find the humanity in the technology." And he doesn't mean this in a mental health way. He uses technology to create some of the films that we enjoyed, like Lion King, and which he's creating now, and Jungle Book. But it is a really important message that that is the opportunity, the bigger opportunities to think about technology as enhancing what makes us human and not diminishing it. And it's a really important time to have this conversation because in addition to the impact of all of the mobile technologies that we all have, I see them around the room, you have them in your pockets, there is now the emergence into the consumer domain of virtual reality, augmented reality, motion capture, wearable physiological devices, and machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms. You all know about this. It's not subtle. It's still just beginning to come here into our lives, but I believe that this is even going to present more of a challenge on how our brains interact with our environments, but also even more of an opportunity for how we can use technology to help improve our function. I believe everyone knows this, but I think it's really important to talk about the fact that the reason we're interested in technology from a therapeutic point of view is that they create experiences. And experiences, as we know from neuroscience, is really the gateway to our brain's plasticity. It is not the only driving force of plasticity. The brain responds reparatively to damage as well, which is a plastic response. But this is really the opportunity that we can create experiences that target our brain's plasticity. And we know how powerful this relationship is, right? You could witness a single tragic event, not get shrapnel in your brain, just witness it, and have a detrimental impact on the function of your brain for the rest of your life. Okay, we call that post-traumatic stress disorder. If we can create in a moment such a powerful experience, if that can be created to lead to that detrimental effect, can we turn it around? So the challenge here for all of us is, can we think about technologies that exist and building new technologies that maximally harness the brain's plasticity to improve our cognition, impact our behaviors, and ultimately to elevate our minds. I think that's the challenge that we all have before us. I want to talk about one particular type of experience. It doesn't mean that everything you have to think about over this weekend relates to this. But personally, I think that in the end, these are going to be some of the most powerful things we create. And I call them the closed-loop system. This is a well-known term from engineering. It's the opposite of what we talked about before with the open-loop system of medicine and education right now. A closed-loop system is where you intervene in some way and you quantify the impact with as low latency as possible, ideally in real time. You then use that data to update and refine your intervention. You apply it again, you record, you cycle over and over again. And with each pass through this closed loop, you're becoming more targeted to the outcome you're trying to yield. We know very well that this is the most powerful way to change any system. It's used all throughout our physical world, right? Thermostats are essentially sensing the temperature in the environment and then in real time updating heating or cooling systems to maintain equilibrium. Modern day dryers use it, so you don't have to put in a time to dry your clothes, it just senses when the clothes are dry and then stops. We have very, very few examples of these in biological systems. New ones are starting to come out, for example, for diabetes, where we can detect glucose in real time, use that to update insulin levels without having to prick your finger on occasion. starting a little bit in the brain domain to sense maybe oncoming seizures and cancel it out with electrical currents before. But very, very few examples. And in the mental health domain, everything is experimental, not quite there yet. I want to tell you about the work that I've been doing to make it a little bit more personal and to give you some real examples about a closed-loop system that's designed using video games. So this is now a road that I've been on for over a decade. This idea was first popped into my mind in 2008. And the idea is that video games can be used to create very powerful closed-loop systems that could then change the brain. So I want to take you through a cartoon of what that idea is and how it's developed over the last 10 years with new technology. So you're playing a video game. Of course, it's your brain that's playing the game, moving your body along. With your behavior, performance metrics are generated, which can be captured by sensors, like an accelerometer or a tap screen, or more complex sensors than that, but sort of they're the ones that are really accessible. That data can then be used to guide back a change of the environment in real time. That environment can change in two main ways. One, in terms of challenge, so that the challenge that the brain has experienced is now personalized to their ability levels. The other thing that can be done is that feedback and real-time rewards can be delivered, which creates a deep sense of immersion. By using the closed loop, we're able to create an environment that is challenging, but not so hard that it's frustrating and you abandon, not so easy that you're bored and you just let go. And so the mechanics of a game can be used to challenge the brain in such a way that it activates neural networks. As far as I know, that is the only way that we're able to activate brain networks selectively, is through experience. And then the closed-loop system constantly applies pressure to that network by not letting go, over time just pushing it as it advances. It offers us the opportunity for other technologies, like motion capture and physiological recording, which you know are consumer available already, so that we can capture richer, more comprehensive data about you in the moment, feed it into the processor, and then create even more real-world, more immersive, more engaging environments through virtual reality and augmented reality. Another opportunity is to wrap this very complex data loop with advances in machine learning, AI, reinforcement learning, many opportunities there for computational algorithms to advance the complexity. And what we wind up with here is a multimodal, integrated, closed-loop system. I believe that this will be the future of how we think about solutions for mental health on both sides, from people that are healthy to people that are suffering impairments. I want to make this a little more real by telling you about my first journey into this. It started with my idea to build a game called NeuroRacer. I don't have time to break down all the hypotheses that went into this, almost a decade of research from my own lab, but essentially trying to challenge an individual in a closed loop across two different domains. And so it's a pretty simple game, looks like a 1970s game, but what's going on under the hood is more interesting. So you're driving a car, you're maintaining your attention to the road, going left, right, up, down, depending on how the road moves, and at the same time you're required to respond as rapidly and accurately to target signs, like green circles, not green pentagons or red circles. And what's happening here is that both of these tasks are being challenged at your ability level. The other thing that we did, which doesn't sound that complicated, but I think was clever, is that we rewarded performance by improving abilities across both tasks. Because if you were to play this, you would trade off between these tasks, even if you didn't know it. And so what we've done there is coupled together adaptivity and reward cycles. And that was really, I think, the biggest breakthrough. And one thing we learned is that everyone, including 80-year-olds, want to level up in video games. It's just an innate part of being a human. So that's what we did. And the reason why we did this is because the ability to resist interference through distraction and to engage in multiple tasks use a lot of the same brain networks in the prefrontal cortex that we use in other aspects of cognitive control, like working memory and even sustained attention. So, sorry, I'm not going to break that down in detail, but we had a hypothesis based upon neuroscience that suggested if we could challenge you in this task at a high enough level, we would lead to benefits of an improvement outside of the gameplay itself. And so we did a rather long 3-year study, multiple experiments to break that down. The first thing we did is look at the ability to multitask on the game. How well do you do on the sign task where you do it alone compared to when you're driving at the same time? And we looked at that ability using the game as essentially a diagnostic tool across the lifespan. So 20 to 80-year-olds. The first thing we found is that most 20-year-olds, I'm sure a lot of you in the audience in San Francisco believe they are multitasking masters, right? Practicing it all day long. I think probably this room's a little more enlightened about that. But we found that that's not true. As you're probably aware, we suffer a decrement in performance, in this case 27%, by engagement in 2 tasks versus 1 task. We then wanted to ask what happens as we move through the lifespan. Do you just maintain this ability at a high level until you're 69 and then just plummet in one tragic year? Or, as we found out, do you plummet every tragic year of your life? So this is the sad news to many people. I mean, I can see where I am on this curve. And this curve is known for many, many different cognitive abilities. This is probably the first documentation for multitasking, the first one using a video game as a diagnostic tool in this manner, but we see it for processing speed in general, resistance of distraction, working memory, sustained attention. This is a pretty common view of how our brain changes in these very fluid and dynamic cognitive processes. An ability that improves throughout development, peaks probably around 23, so if anyone's at that age, you should be pretty happy. You're sort of at the peak of the pyramid right now, and then this happens. We then asked what happens if you play this closed-loop video game for 1 month as a senior, a 60 to 70-year-old. And what we found is after a month of training, when we bring you back into the lab, we find that there's a remarkable improvement in your ability to multitask on the game that actually remains 6 months later even without playing the game. It does not decline significantly. But what was most impressive is that we confirmed our hypothesis and showed that we also improved sustained attention and working memory abilities in this population. Very, very different test than the game environment. And 2 control groups, one of whom played this game in single task mode, never had to deal with the interference of the 2 tasks combined. They didn't show any improvement in their ability to multitask significantly, nor did they show transfer of benefits to sustained attention or working memory. So what we do there is characterize the active ingredients, to our term from the drug industry, of how this game could be used to improve cognitive abilities outside of gameplay. We published this at the end of 2013 in this journal in Nature. The cover of the journal sort of as good as it gets for us scientists. But what I really think the message here is not that we have a new prescribable treatment, because it certainly was not at this time. But the message that I was most excited about is that scientists could work with professionals in another industry, video game engineers, programmers, artists, developers, to create something entirely new. And I think that's the real opportunity here today, seeing so many different people in the audience. And that's what was most exciting. We could work together to create something new and then go through a very careful validation process to start moving it into practice. Now, I think of this Nature article as a signal that something is here. Convergence of benefits across multiple tests, improvement. We actually reported brain activity using multi-channel EEG before and after, and showed neural network changes associated with this improvement and associated with the transfer of benefits and the sustainability of benefits on the multitask. So that's how we begin to understand the mechanisms involved, so then we can be more informed as we move iteratively into higher level studies, meaning looking at larger groups of people. And so now I just want to tell you about this. I know there's a lot of people from industry here, and growing up, I'm an MD, PhD, growing up as an academic, we sort of were positioned from the point of view that academics lives here, industry lives here, right? I think that is a very destructive way of thinking about things. If we don't actively try to bridge these worlds, which is complex, we'll never move discoveries from the basic science academic world into the real world. And our goal of that study, neuroresearch study, was not to just get a paper, even a paper in a journal like Nature. It was to get into people's lives. And so what I learned was that in order to do that, you need to navigate the complex relationship between these worlds. And so I started a company called Gazzaley. I don't have an executive position there. It allows me to maintain my full-time professorship right here on this campus at UCSF. But we were able to move the technology that I showed you, NeuroRacer, has a patent. I am the inventor. UCSF is the owner. That's the relationship between us professors and the university. And Gazzaley, this new company, has a license to it so that it can move it out as a new treatment. So what Gazzaley's doing is actually quite interesting. As opposed to putting it out there as a consumer device, which is not a wrong thing to do, we've decided to take it through multiple clinical trials. So now, when I say it, this game is on a whole other level from what NeuroRacer was on. So when you work with a team of professionals, these are like literally AAA video game professionals from the industry that now work in this domain, we can bring on higher levels of art, music, story, better UI, more complex reward cycles, better use of the cloud for server and analytical support. So you can do a lot when you have a great team as you move beyond the academic world. But The real opportunity is once you create something like this is do multiple studies to start to validate it at a higher level. And when I say a higher level, I don't mean that the work that we did here at UCSF wasn't important, but we were looking more for like a signal, feasibility, mechanism, smaller numbers. As you want to move into the world, you got to do larger numbers, more multi-site trials, and so some of these are phase 1, phase 2, and even phase 3 clinical trials. We've completed now a phase 3 clinical trial for pediatric ADHD. That is a multi-site, double-blind, randomized, prospectively designed, placebo-controlled study of a video game in children with ADHD. That study was positive for our primary outcome measure, and we are now working with the FDA to position this as the first non-drug treatment for ADHD, the first prescribable video game, and the first of a new category of medicine that we think of as digital medicine. So, very exciting times. We're not quite there yet. As you can imagine, this is a very new type of treatment. As you know, there's only one approved treatment in this domain, and so there's a lot of hurdles, some things that we didn't even expect. But we are optimistic and confident that we will figure our way through. And this is not just about Achille and this product. This is the idea that we can move these types of interactive experiences as treatments. So right now, we largely have pharmaceutical medicines that offer molecular treatments. We think about digital medicines as offering experiential treatments. That is the treatment. The video game is essentially like our delivery system, something that creates engagement and immersion that leads to deep compliance and also engagement in the moment. But it's really the experience that we believe is creating the beneficial effects. All right, I'm going to move quicker so you can get about your day. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about Neuroscape, which is around like probably 500 feet from here. So this is our center at UCSF. This started off as my laboratory. But after our Nature paper, no one really wanted to just do cognitive neuroscience, not just, but no one wanted to do research that was only focusing on how the brain worked. We now consider ourselves a translational neuroscience lab where our primary goal is to help people and also bridge this gap that we see existing between the tech world and the neuroscience world. And so I think I have a picture yet. So this is the building. If you go outside, you'll see it to your left. This is what one of our labs look like. We now have several labs. We've been opening these labs actually all over the world now. Neuroscape Research Labs. This is the control room. It sits on the opposite side of this laboratory. And what this allows us to do is high-level interactive media. We design them. We build prototypes at Neuroscape. And then we can do studies over time. And so this is what one of our labs look like. I want to point out that there's 2 MRI scanners on the opposite side of this wall. On the opposite side of this wall, we can do blood draws. So we can do like deep phase 3 trials with all the other accompanying metrics that are important to understand transfer and benefit in all sorts of different clinical populations. I just want to talk a little about some of the technology that we think is important. So I'm talking about this from the perspective of Neuroscape, but I really want to emphasize that this is what the field is moving into globally. And I travel around the world because of this, because I see it happening everywhere. So the first is mobile and wireless, right? The accessibility of these devices is so impressive and important to move doctors and teachers into places in the world we have no treatments right now able to penetrate. So we just completed a study of MetaTrain, which is a meditation-inspired video game created at Neuroscape, showing improvement in sustained attention as well as attention behaviors in foster care children in India. So really important example about how not just the benefits of these type of interactive treatments, experiential treatments, but also the ability to reach places that have been largely inaccessible. So not just the software, but also the hardware, like the recording of physiology and even brain activity during engagement. This is also becoming more accessible. We also have an assessment we've been working on. So I don't want to just place sole emphasis on treatments. I know there's a broad array of interests here. There's a ton to do on assessments. We have an assessment that uses a closed-loop system. We call it adaptive cognitive evaluation. And I put this slide up to tell you that we've moved beyond the clinical domain. This is a study of 1,200 children, 8 to 12 years old, looking with this at their cognitive abilities across a broader array of tasks to understand how their cognitive abilities map on to their reading and math performance and other aspects that are important for their lives. Shockingly, we don't really even fully understand that relationship. It seems like that's what education should have been doing for a long time. So again, massive opportunity. And I know maybe for some of you this feels outside of the mental health domain, but it's really not. This is a very dynamic time in someone's life, and there's all sorts of maybe even unacknowledged challenges with emotional regulation and attention that are just really fluid. They can switch from what we would think of to a mental health issue to not. So I really do believe that this is part of the same bigger goals that we have. Virtual reality. Virtual reality is not a head-mounted display. I think a head-mounted display is an amazing technology that is only going to get better. But when we think about virtual reality, we're really thinking about sensory immersion across the full array of channels that we're capable of perceiving the world, as well as moving in this domain. Tremendous opportunity, I believe, across the full spectrum of the mental health world for virtual reality to play a role, but a lot of that is really just still hypothesis. So great opportunity, still early. Over the last 7 years, we have been taking the lessons that we learned from Neuration and building multiple other experiential treatments. You see their names here. Unfortunately, I don't have time to talk through all of these, but I can tell you that they each target different aspects of neural systems and cognitive abilities. They all bring on art, music, story, and reward to create the experiences themselves. I would say that we do not build products here at Neuroscape, we build prototypes, but we do believe it's important to get close to these type of interactive experiences that create enjoyment and engagement. And they all use different technologies. We have some technology, like you see on the top, called Body Brain Trainer, which in addition to closed-loop systems that give you cognitive challenges that are perfectly suited to your abilities, we also record your heart rate, and in real time, update the physical amplitude of your movements to drive your heart rate to a zone that we want to target. So that's an example of running a closed-loop system in the cognitive domain and the physical domain in parallel. The hypothesis there is that if you challenge the brain in an embodied way, we will have better cognitive outcomes than if we don't. So if you could compare that to like a tablet game. So I'm not going to break this down, but you can see several experiments here in virtual reality, including meditation-inspired studies. The hope, these three are all moving into now into the publication domain. So it takes us around 2 years to build each of these, and another 2 years to do just the first study on it. The real win, though, is putting this all together, something I think of as neural cross-training. Not creating silos around every single one of our high-tech solutions, right? Not to step in those same footsteps that we've seen the pharmaceutical industry walk in, where every treatment has a silo around it. That is not going to be the most optimal path forward. We have to think about how these interact with each other and how they interact with current treatments that we're using. After we build these, we do pretty much the deepest dive, I think, that anyone does into understanding how they work. So let's say you are a participant in our study on body brain training. You come here to UCSF, you'd spend days getting an MRI looking at functional and structural data. You get an EEG looking at neural oscillations during cognitive challenges. We do stress testing, mood evaluation. We do blood work looking at hormone levels, inflammatory markers, and telomere lengths. You then engage in a treatment, or that could be targeting different things, and then you come and we see what changes in you. So all of this is going on. So we've been putting as much effort into improving the methodology by which we validate these type of treatments as developing them. And so what we hope, and we're not quite there yet, although we've been working for a decade, is that we can start moving these into both of these domains to really address this cognitive challenge. We can also then enhance the effects. I'm just going to touch on this because I think it's a really exciting opportunity, is that we like video games as a tool. It's not the only tool, but it activates networks selectively in a fun, engaging way that can be adapted very readily with a closed loop. But we can use other technologies in neuroscience, like new approaches to neuromodulation and neurofeedback to then enhance those effects. So we have studies right now using non-invasive brain stimulation. We were focusing on transcranial direct current stimulation, but now we're using alternating current, transcranial alternating current stimulation, showing that we can improve the performance in 20-year-olds on a video game across an hour. We have 3 papers published on that already. Now the big challenge is, does this lead to better transfer, quicker transfer, longer lasting effects? Unknown. And so that's where we're approaching. But what I think the ultimate win from the neuroscience perspective is to be able to record brain activity in real time. So this is a technology you could read much more about online than I'm going to talk about today, called the glass brain. It's actually my glass brain. So it's a combination of an MRI image. You can see the purple of the cortical structure of the brain, the golden fibers of the white matter that connect different brain areas, and then integrated with this is real time. I mean, obviously it's pre-recorded now, but if I was running an EEG cap, it would be essentially just 200 millisecond delay, 64 channel wireless EEG that goes through multiple transformation processing steps, from artifact correction to source localization to multivariate range of causality, trying to model and understand how brain areas are active and communicating with each other while someone is engaged in an interactive experience. So this is still really a proof of concept. It's a real data visualization, but its use is complicated by the fact that the brain is super complex, and it certainly needs mining and machine learning and pattern classification approaches to interpret this. But once we get to that point, we now have the opportunity to look at real-time diagnostics while people engage in technologically delivered experiences, and ultimately to close the loop. So if we knew what was happening inside a person's brain in the moment, or our computer or AI knew, we can update the challenge and the rewards, not just based on their performance or even their physiology, but based upon how their brain is processing information in the moment. So I would say what better use of there is AI than to advance HI, human intelligence. And I think this is a perfect example of where all the algorithm development in that domain could really have a very powerful benefit on us as humans. So with that, I would think about this goal of enhancing and understanding human cognition. I'm really excited to see so many of you here this weekend. I would encourage you to dig deep in, feel your passion in this domain, your creativity, and be brave and get out there and change the world. So with that, I'd like to thank you.